The exam paper hit the floor before the session was even half over. Sora did not slam it down. She did not throw it in anger. She simply let it fall from her claws, the way you let go of something that has stopped making sense, and she stared at the wall with her amber eyes half closed, and her blue-green scales dimming the way they always did when she was quietly miserable. Instructor Vedran said nothing for a moment. He had 4 arms and had taught mathematics for longer than most species lived, and in all that time, he had never had a student like Sora. Not because she was a dragon. The Academy had hosted Draknari students before. He had never had a student like Sora because she was, by every measure he knew, both brilliant and completely unteachable. She had walked into the Academy 18 months ago as the youngest Draknari ever accepted into the Concordat program. The ambassador from her home cluster had made 3 speeches about it. There had been a small ceremony. Sora had spent most of it watching a dust particle drift through a ventilation current and calculating, in her head, exactly how long it would take to reach the far wall. That was the problem, really. She calculated everything. She just could not do it on paper, in the format the Academy required, using the symbols the Concordat had standardized 400 years ago. Vedran picked up the fallen paper. He looked at it. She had answered 2 questions out of 14. Both answers were correct. The rest of the page was covered in tiny drawings, curved lines, circles inside circles, something that looked like a map of a star system. He had seen this before every exam, every quiz, every timed drill. The drawings were not random. He was fairly sure they meant something. He had simply never been able to figure out what. "Sora," he said carefully. "I know," she said. "This is the 3rd consecutive failed assessment." "I know. Director Nala will need to be informed." Sora said nothing. She breathed out a slow curl of cold mist. She was one of the rare Draknari who exhaled cold instead of heat, which the Academy medical staff had noted as a developmental curiosity, and which Sora found deeply embarrassing, and she looked back at the exam paper in Vedran's hand with the expression of someone looking at a door that has no handle. The meeting with Director Nala happened that afternoon. Vedran stood to one side while Nala, who was short and dense and spoke with the clipped efficiency of someone who billed time by the second, reviewed Sora's file on her desk screen. Nala's species came from a high-gravity world, and they carried themselves like they were always slightly impatient with how slowly everything else moved. 3 failures, Nala said. In the standard assessment, not the advanced tier, the foundation tier. "Correct," said Vedran. "And in your professional assessment, the student is." "Not unintelligent," Vedran said, and he meant it. She solved the corridor navigation puzzle last week, the one the 3rd-year students use for applied geometry practice. She did it in her head in about 4 minutes. She had never seen it before. Nala looked up from the screen. "She cannot, however," Vedran continued, "translate that ability into the written symbolic format the assessment requires. I have tried 6 different instructional methods. None of them have worked." Nala was quiet for a moment. Outside her office window, the orbital station turned slowly against the dark, and the light of the nearest sun moved across the floor in a long golden stripe. "Expulsion," Nala said, "is not an option. The Draknari ambassador has made that extremely clear." "I understand. So we find another option." Nala tapped her screen twice. "The human teaching attachment arrived last week. Dario Fenn, former cartographer now with the Concordat Education Corps. He requested an assignment. I had not yet decided where to place him." She paused. "I will place him with Sora." Vedran opened his mouth, closed it, then said carefully, "The human has been in the Concordat for 6 weeks, yes, I am aware. His species has been in the Concordat for 40 years. Also aware." Vedran had nothing else to say that would not sound exactly as doubtful as he felt, so he said nothing. He did not stay for the rest of the meeting, but on his way back to his classroom he passed the viewport corridor, and he saw Sora there, pressed against the transparent barrier, her small nose almost touching the glass, watching the stars with an intensity that he had never once seen her direct at a textbook. Her scales had brightened again, that deep iridescent blue-green, alive and shifting, and her tail moved slowly back and forth like she was thinking. She was talking to herself, quietly, in Draknari. He did not speak the language well, but he caught two words he recognized. Distance pattern. He stood there for a moment, watching her watch the stars, and then he walked on, and he thought that perhaps the problem had never been that Sora could not learn. Perhaps the problem was that no one had yet found what she was already listening to. Sora had been told, very carefully and very officially, that her new instructor was a human. She spent the walk to his classroom deciding she was not going to like him. It was not personal. She had nothing against humans. She had simply never met one, and everything she knew about them came from a 2-paragraph entry in the Concordat species database that described them as adaptable, emotionally variable, and comparatively short-lived. Their homeworld had been space-capable for less than 3 centuries. They had joined the Concordat 40 years ago. They were, by galactic standards, new. And they had given her a new one as a teacher. The classroom was not where she expected it to be. The Academy's main instructional wing was all clean corridors and bright light and the faint hum of ventilation systems. But the address she had been given led her to a different section of the station, a repurposed storage bay on the outer ring, the kind of place that had been cleared out and given a new function without being given a new personality. The walls were the same gray metal. The ceiling was low. But someone had covered one entire wall with a star map. Not a digital one, a physical one, printed on something that looked like old paper, pinned up in sections that didn't quite line up, dotted with small handwritten notes in a script she didn't recognize. A man was standing with his back to her, adjusting one corner of the map with a piece of adhesive. He was not tall. He had dark hair going gray at the sides and the kind of posture that suggested he spent a lot of time looking up at things. "You're Sora," he said without turning around. "You heard me come in." "You breathe cold." I felt the temperature drop. He pressed the corner of the map flat and turned around. He had a calm, unhurried face, the kind that seemed to have already processed whatever surprise it was going to have and moved on. "I'm Dario. Sit anywhere." There were 2 chairs. Sora sat in the one farther from the desk, mostly out of habit. Dario did not go to the desk. He went to the wall and dimmed the lights until the room was almost dark, and then he did something that made Sora go very still. He activated a holographic projector mounted in the ceiling, and the room filled with stars. Not a diagram, not a chart. Stars. A full 3-dimensional map of the local galactic arm, slow rotating, with the soft blue glow of distant clusters and the faint red of nebulae and the white-hot points of young suns. Sora had seen star maps before, but not like this, not wrapped around her, not filling the air from floor to ceiling, not so quiet and so large that it felt like being outside. She did not say anything, she just looked. "Where do you come from?" Dario asked. It took her a moment to realize he was asking her a real question, not starting a lesson. She raised one claw and pointed. The Draknari home cluster, a loose arrangement of gold and amber stars near the trailing edge of the arm. "I thought so," he said. He stepped closer to it, hands behind his back. "Your people navigated between those stars before they had instruments. Did you know that?" "Everyone did," she said. "Pattern navigation. You read the cluster shapes." "Right. How did they know how long a journey would take?" Sora tilted her head. This felt like a trap, but it also felt like an honest question. "They counted the drift. Each cluster shifts relative to its neighbors at a known rate. You measure the shift, you know the time. And if you wanted to know the distance, not just the time, you use the brightness. A star's real brightness against how bright it looks. The difference tells you how far you are." Dario nodded slowly. Like she had confirmed something he had already suspected. He said nothing else for a moment. "That's a ratio," he said at last. Sora blinked. "What?" "What you just described. Apparent brightness against absolute brightness. That's a ratio. It's the same operation as dividing one number by another." He looked at her. "You already know how to do it. You've probably been doing it your whole life." Sora opened her mouth, closed it. She thought about the navigation puzzle she had solved in the corridor last week. She thought about the way she had done it, not by calculating, not the way the textbook said, but by imagining the shape of the distances, by feeling where things had to be. "That's not mathematics," she said, but she said it less certainly than she intended. "It's exactly mathematics," Dario said, without any particular emphasis, the way someone might say the sky is dark or water is cold. The symbols are just a way of writing it down. They're not the thing itself. He turned the lights back up slightly. He pulled 2 chairs closer to the star map and sat in one. After a moment, Sora moved to the other. "Tell me," he said, "about the last problem you couldn't solve on an exam. Describe it to me the way you describe it to another dragon." No teacher had ever asked her that before. She described it. She described it slowly because she was used to hiding the way she thought, and it felt strange to say it out loud. And as she talked, Dario listened, not writing notes, not correcting her, just listening with the expression of someone who had suspected for a long time that a door existed and had just found the handle. When she left an hour later, she was not sure what had happened. It had not felt like a lesson. It had not felt like anything she could name. But on the walk back to her room, she caught herself counting the stars visible through the viewport corridor, and she realized she was doing it in fractions, and she had not even noticed she had started. There is a particular kind of frustration that has nothing to do with anger. Sora knew it well. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of something and knowing the answer was close. She could almost smell it, almost see the shape of it, and then having it dissolve the moment she tried to hold it in the formal way the Academy required, like trying to catch smoke with open claws. She had felt it every day for 18 months. She did not feel it in Dario's classroom. That was the strange part. She felt other things there, confused sometimes, slow, like her mind was being asked to walk a path it had always run sideways across, but not that particular frustration, not the one that made her scales go dark. The sessions had a rhythm now. They had been meeting for 3 weeks. Dario never started with a problem. He always started with something real. The day he taught her fractions, he began with moons. He pulled up a simulation of a small gas planet orbiting a dim star, 4 moons circling it at different speeds. He asked her which moon would be in the same position tomorrow. She looked at the orbits, felt the rhythm of them in her head the way she always felt patterns, and told him. "How did you know?" he asked. "This one takes 4 days to go around. This one takes 6. In 12 days they'll both be back where they started." She paused. "I don't know how I know, I just see it." "You divided," Dario said. "You found a number that both 4 and 6 fit into. That's a fraction problem." He wrote it out on the board. She stared at the symbols, and for once they looked like something she already understood. The day he taught her multiplication, he turned off the lights and pointed at a single star at the edge of the map. "Light from that star is reaching us right now," he said. "It left home 8 years ago. How far has it traveled?" Sora did not know the speed of light in concordat units without looking it up, so Dario gave her the number. She held it in her head, turned it, felt it. 8 years. That many seconds in a year. That many times that distance. "It's the same number stacked on itself," she said slowly. "That's multiplication." "That's just—" She stopped. She looked at the star. "That's enormous," she said, which was not about mathematics at all, and which Dario seemed to understand perfectly. It was not easy. She needed to say that clearly, even to herself, because it would have been a comfortable lie to say it came naturally. Some days she got it immediately. Other days her mind refused to cross from the real thing to the symbol, and she sat with her claws on the desk and her cold mist curling up around her chin in little clouds of frustration. And Dario waited without filling the silence with explanations, which was the most unusual thing any teacher had ever done for her. The hard day came in the fourth week. He was teaching negative numbers. He had been explaining the concept using debt, using temperature, using the idea of things owed. None of it was landing. Sara felt the edges of the idea but not the center. She tried twice to write out the example he gave and got it wrong both times, and the third time she pushed the paper away and stood up, and the cold mist came out thicker than usual, enough that it drifted across the desk in a visible cloud. "This is pointless," she said, and she meant it, and she walked out. She went to the viewport corridor. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and looked at the stars and tried to breathe slowly. Dario appeared beside her about 4 minutes later. He did not say she should come back. He stood next to her and looked at the same stars. After a while he pointed to one faint, red-edged, barely visible. "That star is dead," he said. Sora looked at it. "It doesn't look dead." "It isn't anymore. It died about 3,000 years ago, but the light from before it died is still traveling. We're seeing old light." He paused. "If 0 is right now, the star is below 0. It already happened. The number that describes when it died is a negative number. It's on the other side of the present." Sora was quiet. She thought about a star that had burned for billions of years and then gone dark, and whose last light was still crossing the galaxy, still arriving at new eyes, still saying, "I was here," long after the here was gone. "Below 0, she said softly. "Below 0. She went back to the classroom. She picked up the paper. She got the third example right, then the fourth. Then she went back through the first two and corrected them. Dario sat on the edge of the desk and said nothing, which was exactly right. When she left that day, she stopped at the door and asked him something she had been holding for a while. "Why do you teach this way? No other instructor does." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My grandmother could not read until she was 40 years old, but she could navigate a boat across open water at night by reading the stars and the current and the way birds flew. Everyone in her village thought she was slow." He looked at the star map. She was the best navigator they had ever seen. It just took someone asking her how she thought, instead of telling her how she should. Sara looked at him for a long moment. "Was she a dragon?" Sora asked, and she was completely serious. Dario laughed, a real one, surprised out of him, and said no, she was human, and the laugh was warm enough that Sora's scales brightened 3 shades without her even noticing. The examination hall on the Academy's 3rd level had no star map on the wall. It had no windows, no viewports, no holograms. It had white walls and white light and 40 individual desks arranged in precise rows, and it smelled faintly of the cleaning solution the station staff used on the floors every night. Sara walked in and took the desk assigned to her, far right, second from the back, and she sat down and placed her claws flat on the surface and told herself to breathe slowly. Around her, other students filed in. A pair of Solvathi from the advanced tier. 3 Kethori children with their parents' same dense, serious expressions. A young Dravki who hummed quietly to herself in a way that was probably soothing, but that the Solvathi nearby clearly found annoying. Nobody spoke. The hall had a weight to it, the kind that came not from gravity but from expectation. Instructor Vedran placed the examination papers face down on each desk and said the standard opening, the same words he had spoken at the start of every assessment for 200 years, and then he said begin, and Sara turned the paper over. 14 questions. The same format she had failed 3 times before. Abstract number glyphs arranged in rows, each one a gate with a particular combination lock, and the Academy expected you to have memorized the combinations. The first question had no stars in it. No moons, no distances, no dead light crossing empty space. It was symbols, symbols in a row, waiting for an answer in the same symbolic language. Sora looked at it. She looked at it for what felt like a long time, but was probably 40 seconds. Then she picked up her marking pen, and in the small white margin beside the first question she drew a circle. Inside the circle she put a smaller circle. Between them she wrote a number, the ratio of their sizes, and then she looked at the question again, and the symbols resolved into something she recognized, and she wrote the answer. She moved to the second question. She drew a line in the margin, marked a point on it, marked a second point, labeled the distance between them. The symbols in the question became a journey. She wrote the answer. Question by question, she translated. Every margin on the paper filled slowly with tiny drawings. A gas planet with 4 moons, a ship moving between 2 stars, a point on a line labeled 0 with an arrow pointing left into the negative space. The drawings were small and quick and slightly uneven because she was working fast, but they were precise. She had never been imprecise with anything spatial, even when she was trying to be careless. 11 questions in, she hit a wall. Question 12 involved a type of operation she had only seen twice in Dario's sessions, and the last time she had gotten it wrong. She stared at it, drew a small star in the margin, then a second one, then the space between them, then the ratio of that space to another space, and she held the picture in her head and turned it slowly like an object in her claws, looking for the shape of it, the way she had always solved things before she knew she was solving things. She got it. She was not certain she got it right, but she got something. She finished question 14 with 6 minutes remaining on the clock. She went back and checked question 12 twice. She changed one number, changed it back, left it. When Vedran collected the papers, he did not look at hers in the hall. He was professional about these things. But Sora saw his eyes go to the margin of the top page as he stacked it with the others, and she saw something happen in his face, not shock exactly, but the expression of a very controlled person making a rapid internal adjustment. She left the hall and sat on a bench in the corridor and waited. The results came the next morning. Vedran delivered them in person, which was unusual. He came to the storage bay classroom, where Sora was in the middle of a session with Dario, and he stood in the doorway with the digital result sheet in 2 of his 4 hands and his other 2 folded behind his back. He looked at Dario first. "She passed," he said. Dario nodded once, like he had been told something he expected rather than something that surprised him. "Not the highest score in the cohort," Vedran continued, "but a passing score, a clear one." He paused. He looked at Sora. "Every correct answer on your sheet had a drawing in the margin beside it." "I know," Sora said. "Is that against the rules?" Vedran thought about this for a moment longer than she expected. "No," he said finally, "it is not against the rules." He looked at the result sheet once more, as if confirming something. "It had simply never occurred to me before to wonder if the rules needed to be broader." He left. Sora watched him go, and then she looked at Dario, who was leaning back in his chair with his arms folded and looking at the star map with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had planted something a long time ago and was only now seeing the first green shoot. "You knew I'd pass," she said. "I thought you'd pass. There's a difference." "What if I hadn't?" "Then we'd have found out what else needed a different approach and kept going." He said it simply, not bravely, just like it was the obvious next step. Sora looked at the star map. Outside, somewhere past all that metal and glass and distance, the galaxy continued its enormous business of burning and cooling and moving through space. In the margin of a test paper somewhere in Vedran's office, 14 small drawings sat beside 14 correct answers. "Can we go to the viewport tonight?" she asked. "Yes," Dario said. "Bring your atlas." She already had it. The quarterly symposium of the Concordat Academy Educational Council was not, by design, a dramatic event. It was held in a medium-sized conference room on the station's administrative level, the walls lined with data screens showing curriculum metrics and assessment statistics in small, dense fonts. The attendees were instructors, directors, and curriculum specialists from 12-member species, most of them elderly by their own species standards, most of them holding opinions they had held for a very long time. The sessions were orderly. The conversations were polite. Disagreement was expressed through careful academic language that could take several sentences to confirm it was, in fact, disagreement. Dario sat near the back. He had been invited as an attachment, which in practice meant he had been given a chair and a courtesy listing on the agenda and was not actually expected to speak. Director Nala had told him this in her efficient way, not unkindly but precisely. He was new. He was human. The council would find his presence interesting the way one finds an unfamiliar piece of furniture interesting, worth nodding, not worth consulting. He had brought data anyway. The first 3 sessions passed without incident. Curriculum updates, assessment format reviews, a 20-minute discussion about the standardization of grading across species that resolved nothing and satisfied everyone. Then the council moved to the item listed as Exceptional Cases Review, which was a polished way of referring to students who had failed to meet standard benchmarks, and without planning to, Dario raised his hand. There was a pause. Nala, who was chairing, looked at him with an expression that said she had anticipated this possibility and had not fully decided how she felt about it. "Mr. Fenn," she said. "I'd like to present something," Dario said. "It won't take long." He had asked Sora's permission 3 days earlier. She had thought about it, which he respected, and then said yes, provided he did not make her sound like a problem that had been solved, because she was not a problem. He had agreed completely. He stood up and sent his file to the main screen. It was not about Sora. That is, she was in it, but she was not the point of it. The point of it was a question presented as a table. Across the left column, every species currently enrolled in the academy system. Across the top, the dropout rate from foundational mathematics in the first 2 years. And beside that, a second column showing the distance, measured in pedagogical terms, between that species' native learning tradition and the abstract symbolic system the Concordat used as its standard. The correlation was clear enough that several people in the room leaned forward. The species with learning traditions closest to the abstract symbolic model, primarily the Solvathi, who had developed the system in the first place, had the lowest dropout rates. As the traditions diverged, the rates climbed. Consistently, across 800 years of academy records that nobody had arranged in quite this way before. "I didn't run a complex analysis," Dario said. "I just sorted the existing data differently. The data has always been there." A senior Solvathi academic named Orath, who had white crystalline structures along his shoulders that indicated age and seniority, spoke first. He said, with the careful precision of someone who is disagreeing but does not wish to be impolite, that the abstract symbolic system had successfully educated billions of students across species, and that the dropout rates Dario was displaying could reflect many factors beyond pedagogical style. "That's true," Dario said, "but I want to ask a different question." He looked at the table on the screen. How many billions did it fail, and did we notice, or did we just record them as failures and move on? The room was quiet. Not hostile quiet, thinking quiet. An elderly Dravki scholar, her people were small and dark-feathered, and known across the Concordat for an oral tradition so rich it had produced 600 years of unbroken recorded history, raised one small hand. "I have wondered this," she said. "For 40 years I lacked the way to say it clearly." She looked at Dario. "Thank you for saying it." Orath did not change his position, but he stopped arguing it, which in a Solvathi of his standing was its own kind of movement. The session ended without a formal resolution, which was normal. These things moved slowly, but afterward in the corridor outside the conference room. Vedran found Dario and stood beside him, and was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was organizing something he wanted to say accurately. I have taught mathematics for 211 years, Vedran said at last. I know, Dario said. I have never once asked why the method exists, only whether the student was following it. He paused. That is a significant thing to realize at my age. It's a significant thing to realize at any age, Dario said. Vedran looked at him with the four-armed, crystalline-faced expression that, on a Solvathi, was the closest thing to being moved that their physiology allowed. Then he went back inside, because there was a second session starting. Dario took the long way back through the station. He passed the viewport corridor. Sora was there. She had not been at the symposium. She had a standard class that afternoon. But she was at the viewport now, in the night cycle dim, with his borrowed star atlas open on the floor beside her and her nose almost touching the glass and her scales the deep, bright blue-green of a mind fully engaged. She was talking to herself in low Draknari, working through something. He caught numbers in among the words, distances. He stayed quiet and listened, and what he heard was not a student reciting a lesson. It was a person thinking. 1 year is not a long time by most galactic standards. For the Solvathi it was a brief administrative period. For the Kethari it was a rounding error in their fiscal planning. For the Draknari, whose elders measured their own ages in centuries, 1 year was roughly equivalent to the time between one important thought and the next. For Sara it had been enormous. She was larger now. Draknari grew fast in the early years, adding length and scale density in bursts that sometimes happened noticeably between 1 month and the next. Her iridescent blue-green scales had deepened in color, and the cold mist she exhaled when she was thinking hard came more steadily and with more control. She had stopped being embarrassed about it. She had started using it to illustrate things, drawing shapes in the air with it during study sessions, watching the cold vapor curl and disperse the way distant gas clouds did in time-lapse astronomical footage. The advancement ceremony for the foundational cycle was held in the main hall of the academy, which was tall and formal and lined with the flags of every Concordat member species. The Draknari ambassador attended. Director Nala sat at the head table with the careful posture of someone who had organized this event down to the last second. Vedran sat in the second row, his forearms folded, watching with the quiet attention of someone who had decided, recently, to pay a different kind of attention to things. The ceremony followed tradition. Students were called forward one by one. They received their advancement marks. They were asked, as tradition required, to name one thing they had learned in the foundational cycle, not a fact, not a formula, but a thing understood. Most students named a concept. A Solvathi student named the principle of recursive logic. One of the Kethori children named structural load distribution, which was impressive and slightly terrifying for someone her age. The young Dravki, who hummed to herself, named the history of the first Concordat navigation charts, which made the elderly Dravki scholar in the audience exhale a slow breath of what was clearly pleasure. Sora was last. She walked to the front of the hall. She was the tallest student there now, and the room adjusted to her the way rooms do when something large but quiet moves through them, and she turned and looked at the audience. Her scales were very bright. Her amber eyes were steady. She said, I learned that numbers are just another language for describing the universe, and the universe speaks every language if you know how to listen. The Draknari ambassador made a sound that was not quite a word in any language, but that needed no translation. Director Nala looked at her for a moment with an expression that was as close to moved as Nala's face was built to get. Then she made a small note on her program and composed herself. Dario was sitting at the side of the hall in a seat he had arrived early to claim, near the viewport wall, because he had suspected Sora would look for a familiar landmark when she was nervous. He watched her walk back to her seat, and he did not applaud loudly or make any particular gesture, because that was not how he did things, but he smiled, and she saw it, and that was enough. Afterward in the corridor, Sora found him. She had something in her claw, a small carved piece of dark stone the size of his palm, shaped into a loose cluster of rounded points. He took it and looked at it. "That's the cluster," she said, meaning the one she had pointed to on the very first day, in the dim of the storage bay classroom with the holographic stars wrapped around them. The Draknari home cluster, gold and amber in the memory, dark stone in the hand. "I calculated the exact distance," she said, "in light years and also in Concordat standard units because I know you prefer those. And I calculated how long it would take a Draknari long-haul ship at standard cruise speed to reach it from here." She said the number. Both numbers in sequence, without hesitation, in the same tone she might use to say the time of day. Dario held the small carved cluster. It was smooth on the underside where she had worn it down, which meant she had been carrying it for a while. "It's good work," he said, meaning the calculation and also the carving and also the year. "The pathway program," she said. "Nala approved the expansion. 6 more students next cycle, maybe 12 the cycle after." She nodded, as if confirming something she had already calculated. She had done that more and more lately, arrived at conclusions before they were announced, and simply confirmed them when the world caught up. They walked together to the viewport corridor. It was night cycle, the stations long dark, and the stars were out in full. Sora pressed one claw gently to the glass, not her whole nose the way she used to, which had left a small permanent smudge that the cleaning staff had given up removing, just one claw lightly, like a greeting. She started narrating. She did it quietly, in a mix of Concordat common language and the mathematical shorthand she and Dario had developed between them over months of sessions, half story and half equation, describing the movement of a system she had been tracking for the last 3 weeks, its orbital rhythms and mass relationships, and the way its outer planet wobbled in a way that suggested something unseen was pulling at it. Dario listened. He occasionally corrected, mostly he just listened. After a while Sora said, still looking at the stars, "I used to think you were teaching me about numbers. What do you think now?" She was quiet for a moment. The cold mist curled from her nose and drifted against the glass, slow and soft. "That you were teaching me how to ask questions," she said. Dario looked at the stars. "You were always going to figure that out," he said. "I just turned the lights off so you could see them." Outside, the galaxy continued its enormous quiet work. Light that had left its source thousands of years ago was still arriving, still crossing the dark, still finding new eyes to reach. Somewhere in the distance, a star that no longer existed was sending its last message forward through time. And in a viewport corridor on a turning station, a baby dragon who had once failed mathematics 3 times in a row was calculating, from memory, exactly how long that light had been traveling. She got the answer right.